Hello, I'm David Eichholtz with David Richard Gallery located in New York City, and today I'm with Dee Shapiro, and we're standing in Dee's current exhibition in our gallery town location on 121st Street. And this is a very interesting body of work, and this actually is a third exhibition solo exhibition for Dee in our gallery. And Dee's probably most known to her collectors and a lot of people in the art world as someone who's known to work in the area referred to as pattern and decoration. And her initial work was much more mathematically oriented and based on the Fibonacci sequence. And so they were a bit more geometric, and I considered them more sort of systemic pattern painting as opposed to decoration. But also when Dee started, and you kind of came into the art world later than many artists. I mean, you always had an interest in it, but because of raising a family and everything, you came in kind of a little bit later. What were you, about in your 30s, early mid-30s?
I was in my late 30s.
30s. Yeah. And you had the great fortune, though, of sort of stumbling into Miriam Shapiro. And so, and your work has always, and you grew up, and if people read what I've written, and also John Yao did a really nice essay on Dee for the first exhibition, which was a little bit of a survey, but more targeted. It was more of a survey of her aesthetic range, but it was really a narrow, specific body of work that was really designed to tee up these works that we're standing in front of, and which is these figurative works, which were the first figurative works you've actually ever done, because most of your work was really more, as we said, in patterning, and you were inspired very much by sewing and stitching and things like that. So the work tended to reference textiles, even if you did it with paint. You did it with an extruded like a dropper. And so they look like knots. They look like they had been knitted, and it looked like a warp and weft pattern. And so, and that has really kind of carried on throughout your career, and you've then started doing a lot more collaging and incorporating textiles, many of which are old pieces of trim and fabric from your mom and your grandmother. And then also you just collect, you must be a vigorous pack rat. I mean, because I've been to your house and your studio, and it doesn't seem like there's that much stuff sitting around to make all of these.
under tables.
But I do want to get to that because that's a very important element in this. And we had the good fortune of having Dr. Kathy Batista write the catalog essay. And Kathy's a very well-known, established feminist researcher, academic, and she curates a lot of shows, and she's written, I think, 3 books now, focusing largely on British feminism because she was at the Tate. But, and I knew she would love Dee's work, and so I introduced her to this work, and so she agreed to write the essay. And she brought up a lot of really great points and also helped really anchor you kind of in this feminist discourse, which I thought she did a remarkable job. But she also pointed out, interesting things about these more broadly in the art world. But so, as I said, this is the first show now of only these figurative works. And the new thing here is formally, there's large ones like this one, and there's several like this. And some we're just putting directly on the wall. Others are framed, which you've done with a lot of the earlier ones. And also introducing these line drawings, which I think are quite spectacular and very interesting. And we'll talk about the compare and the contrast between these in that regard, here in a second. But what I guess I'm curious about, and what I think people would enjoy hearing your words, what made you decide to kind of, because this is clearly going back to early roots of feminism and the male gaze, and sort of this sort of objectifying women and them being very sexualized. And but was the genesis of this? I mean, what really made you decide to kind of embark on, and these are all very famous, iconic paintings. These are all very famous women over, what, 5 centuries of art history. Right. And because you even have Da Vinci represented in here. So, but what made you decide to, I mean, it's very worthy of looking at, and it's very important because we're all taught these figures in art history and at all levels in our lifetime, and everyone recognizes these images because they're in major museum collections. But what made you decide to embark on this?
I was working with pattern for some time on canvas and on board, and I have a place in the country. At home, I don't have a straight wall to hang something high up. And in the country, I just put this big piece of paper because I wanted to start working very large on paper, just as kind of an experiment. And I developed this very large piece of patterned work with paint. And I began to see a torso. It was inadvertent and it was unconscious. And I looked at it and I was always aware of this kind of painting in the
right.
past, never really related to it in terms of my own work. So this pattern developed into a torso. I mean, it was also unconscious, but as I finished and looked at it, I thought, here we are, the female figure. And so I started doing research, looking at naked, nude women through art history. Mm-hmm. And actually came up, I think, with the Matisse that we have downstairs, and started working on that. I wasn't so comfortable, but I just stayed with it until it developed. And then I just went through the art historical survey of the nudes and just took off from there. Picked the ones. I do a lot of editing. I leave out lots of things. Mm-hmm. I put in lots of things, but it gives me the range of possibilities for all of this collage material. Painting, drawing, everything in it.
And they are figurative and representational elements, but at the same time, they are an abstraction. I mean, like Rousseau, this is The Dream by Rousseau, and it is, these originals are much more detailed, focused on the figure, solely on the figure, and so in most cases. And
I also didn't know the actual size of these paintings, so the drawings just have to do with how I felt that I wanted to develop them. They could be very small, they could be much larger. I'm not sure of the dimensions of each one of these by the artist, but
that's a good point. Yeah, I don't know either. Most of us have seen these mostly in
books,
textbooks and things, and I mean, sometimes you see these at museums, but I'm not noting exactly which ones I've actually seen. I know I've seen Klimt's a lot in museums, just because I really like his work as well. But and the other thing you do that's kind of interesting is you do sort of roughly sketch them out. And this is a distinction I want to make between these that, for all practical purposes, we're going to call these, you consider these paintings, right? Because they're riffing off of a painting, but they're really collage. But what's important to point out to people is a lot of this, even if it's collage, it's your original work. You do a lot of this and then you cut it and treat it as an element.
They don't look like the actual flowers in the painting. They're my own configuration of...
And so there are collages a lot of times, which, Motherwell did that all the time. Motherwell would paint and draw and do things and then cut things out and rip them up or shred them or, tear them. And a lot of artists, I think, was it Nebelson, Bourgeois, I think it was. It also did that, a lot of people did. And so it's sort of repurposing of your own work. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of that in here, but you also appropriate quite a bit. A lot of it is prepared papers, a lot of Japanese papers and really beautiful European papers that are already, like wrapping paper or tissue or bookend papers or things like that. And so you use a lot of that, which is rife with pattern typically. Mm-hmm. And so that all makes sense.
And fabric and lace.
Yeah, and fabric and textiles, a lot of lace and things, which is perfect in here. But what's interesting is the ink. So on these, you do where you drop ink and kind of roll it around. Now, do you try and do it so that it conforms to the figure, or you just do it to break up the space?
It's to break up the space, and I was doing this before on abstract pattern paintings, and I decided to just keep going because it does help me break up the space rather than...
So it's like an organizing element to you.
Yeah, it helps.
But what's interesting though is then when you go to these, which are the same type of paintings, but here you've chosen to actually go ahead and just sketch them properly, but keeping them very simple line drawings. And then you'll go in and embellish them with appropriated materials typically, or again, some of your own work that you've painted and then cut and used.
Just a suggestion of the possibility of continuing the collage, but I didn't want to do. I wanted to keep it simple. I didn't use the breakup forms because I wanted the drawing to be essential.
Yeah, and they are, and I think it's very successful the way you did it because it gives them that classical look. You know, I mean, it looks like, you know, a rendering, you know, to get that an artist would do to come up with an idea then for the painting, because you don't go through and model them with, you know, shading and lots of graphite. It's really a line form, but yet you get the three-dimensionality, and the augmentation is more to kind of get to, which is really the point of your work, I think, and which I'm kind of leading up to that. And
so when I do start drawing on white paper with nothing but the breakup of space, it has that drawing element, but at this scale, it just doesn't work.
That's why I wanted to ask you about it specifically, because it does feel like drawing, even though it's ink, but it's a fine line. And so it does have that same effect as a graphite drawing. So that's why I wanted, and so that's really you just described what I thought is what you were doing, which was to break up the space and give you an organizing element